Oh, they never mind.
Great.
It's automatic. Welcome, everyone. We're just waiting for people to gather. We'll be starting momentarily.
Can you still see my screen, Jay?
I can. I can see you and the screen.
Welcome, everyone. As Jay said, we're just going to give everyone a few minutes to get into the meeting, and then we will get going. Okay. Should we get rolling?
I think so. I think we're holding steady in terms of people coming in.
Great. Okay, well, welcome everyone. My name is Madison Gong. I'm the Vice President of Sports and Program for Special Olympics Washington. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to join us tonight on this very important webinar. We also have an additional webinar coming up in April for those of you that registered for both. It's a chance to maybe get more information on what to expect with the sports season shift. So thank you guys for being here. I really appreciate it. We are in webinar mode, which means you guys will be able to use the chat or the Q&A. So making sure that you're using the Q&A with questions that you have. There were a number of people that submitted feedback for tonight's webinar. And so at the end, we'll have a couple of slides that really targeted a few themes of feedback that we're receiving that I'll answer directly. And then Jay, who from our staff, who's moderating for me tonight, will help me just answer any additional questions that are coming through the chat that you all have. So again, thank you all for being here. Really appreciate it. I'm going to get rolling through the slides here. Okay, so first slide is just sharing. I think everyone is probably aware of the Special Olympics mission, but I felt like this was a really good thing to just start out the call with. Obviously, the mission of Special Olympics is to provide year-round sports training and athletic competition in a variety of Olympic-type sports for children and adults with disabilities. And so at the center of kind of the conversation we'll have tonight is our mission. And I know that there's challenges that come up with change and things that people have questions about or might disagree with. But at the core of why we are doing this is always our athletes and our mission. So hopefully we'll be able to answer some questions related to those things. Two, I wanted to mention, we are moving into the 3-season model, but I think as long as I've been with the organization, which has been since 2013, and as a family member, we're a learning and evolving organization. So one of the things that we are committed to is learning from how this change goes and adapting as we go, because that's going to be super important. We don't ever want to get set in our ways of staying one way for a certain amount of time. So whatever you hear tonight is where we're going to start. That doesn't mean where we'll end. That means that we will continue to just address your guys' concerns, your questions. So please continue to give feedback. I've really appreciated people who have shared their thoughts and feedback. It's just really helpful in kind of guiding the overall direction and helping us maybe focus on some things that got missed or that we can answer more in depth. So sharing a bit more there. Meeting agenda for tonight. We'll be just going over just an overview, talk a little bit about goals. We'll talk about the why and the who. Why are we doing this? Who is involved in this conversation or this decision making? Do a review of the season model, and then we'll spend a good amount of time addressing questions or taking live questions that are coming into the chat. Excuse me. Okay, so goals. What were our goals when we initially started thinking about this model or considering what this would look like? Was just a better overall athlete experience, whether that's the quality of competitions or events that are being offered, increasing the number of local recreational sports opportunities. And I'll talk a little bit about that, honestly, throughout the call, whether that's through the summer recreation portion or really throughout the year. Boosting dedicated training time for our athletes and partners. So this was, again, something I'll dive into a bit further. And then an increase of number of coaches and volunteers who can support from one season to the next. And then better trained and better overall, like, prepared coaches. So those are the goals. So the journey, I know that this is, people are wondering how we decided to do this and who is involved in this conversation. So really wanted to just spend a bit of time going through that. So our journey to this decision was really post-pandemic. It started almost 3 years ago now. I can't believe it's almost 2024. But was really a call for, through conversations with coaches and athletes, families, just around kind of adjusting or maybe reviewing kind of our sports season model. So this is kind of where the conversation started. And in 2021, we had developed a coaches committee that was made up of coaches from around the state and athletes who participated in a conversation around an initial suggestion for our model, sports season model change. And that started in 2021. And so this last year, we really resurfaced the conversation. We rebuilt the committee and started having the conversations again. And we actually have multiple committees that were addressed or utilized during this conversation. So I will talk about that in the next slide. But so what were we hearing when all this was coming up? Really that our current season structure limits coaches' ability to recruit more volunteers between seasons just because there's no time in between seasons. Our current season is jumping from one to the next. As you'll see kind of in the graphics that I'll share right now, every time a state games ends, we start the season the next day. And so that might work for teams who are doing maybe every other season or only doing one season, but for our teams or programs that are doing every single season, that's become a bit of a challenge. Limiting a coach's ability to prepare for each season just due to that limited time in between. So trying to give them more time in between to focus on recruiting and getting other volunteers or just preparing for when the season will start those 2 weeks after. Athletes frustrated by divisioning and competition structure. This has kind of been ongoing. I know that coaches share this sentiment as well. I'm sure that families do as well. But just needing more opportunity for league play or somehow better facilitating divisioning. And so that was why we looked at potentially extending our season slightly so that we have a bit more time to talk about facilitating or the idea of creating more local competition, whether this is scrimmaging between teams or being able to do some sort of league play. We recognize with that there is challenges, whether you're in a rural area or an urban area. Transportation is an issue, having a team nearby is an issue. So we know that it's not an easy thing to address, but moving into this model would allow us to really look at allow that opportunity for those who are able to. One was health partners recommending off seasons between seasons just to reduce the chance of injury. That's with any athlete. Having a bit of downtime between each season or being able to recuperate isn't a bad thing. You'll see this with professional athletes, high school athletes, youth athletes, having just a little bit of time. And for us, it's only 2 weeks in between each season that we're giving an off season. And then lastly was just other states being in a 3-season model. And so the last couple of years, we've attended conferences with other states to get more information. The point is to gather and to just have conversations about what's working well for people, because no system is perfect. And I will tell you that. A lot of our states that we are closely related to or would like to grow into still have challenges, whether that's in a 4-season model, in a 3-season model. There's no system that's perfect. So it really comes down to what works best for the state based off of a multitude of things, weather, staff, resources, volunteer support, capacity, how many sports are they offering? It's kind of a big range of things. So that was part of the decision we made, was really following a model that New York has been in for over 20 years. and which has worked really well for them. And so consulting with them pretty heavily on how this has been successful, because it's important to us to get it right, even though it won't be perfect right out of the gate. And then obviously, New Jersey is actually rolling out a 3-season model. There's a couple other states who are following suit to New York and to some of these other states who have already started to progress into that. So that was something that we really seriously considered when just looking at different types of models and what would work best for Washington. Okay, so who was involved? Individuals and committees. We had a coaches steering committee that we worked with, or that I worked with pretty closely, excuse me, which is made up of 2 or 3 coaches from each region. And we started conversations in summer of this last year as a part of that second segment of conversation. And so it was important for us to have representation from all the regions, because you're going to deal with different problems from different regions in terms of kind of some of the things I mentioned, whether that's challenges around rural participation. If you're an urban community, the challenges might be slightly different. So I think when we were looking at season shifts, how do we make sure that there was representation from each of those regions to be able to try to reflect and make the best decisions possible. Working with the athlete committee as well. Athletes were involved in this conversation. I know I got quite a few comments that people didn't know who was involved or felt like it was just a Special Olympics decision. This decision was actually driven by coaches and athletes. And of course, with the support of staff, it's important for us organizationally and from a business model wise to look at what makes sense. And so, of course, that will be a consideration. So staff are listed here as well. Family members were a part of this conversation, games management team members, specifically our games management team who run our big state games, because when we're talking about changing those games or how they're run or what facilities we would use, that's a pretty big consideration in terms of just how do we place those and where do we place those and what's our facility availability. Board of directors work consulted, and then also our athlete experience committee, which is actually a subcommittee that we have within the board that specifically focuses on athlete experience, which is made up of board members and athletes who are also parents that are board members as well. So mix of folks that were involved in this conversation. So this was not a unilateral decision made by staff. This was really a big community lean in terms of voices heard. And again, like I said, we're adaptable. So please do share feedback. Obviously, the reality is we can't hear everyone's feedback just because that's really hard to facilitate. But of course, we want to hear it. It's just in a sat down setting where we're trying to scope out how we would actually operate. Okay, so let's jump in to the season model. Let me just take a little drink of water real quick. Thanks for your patience. Okay, so this is our current season model. And so over the next few slides, I'll just show our current season structure. I'll talk about our future season structure and some challenges and considerations that were nested in here. Current season structure, we're in 4 seasons right now. And as I mentioned before, actually I think I didn't mention that we're talking about other SO states. For those who've been around in Special Olympics Washington for any period of time, actually previous to 2018 games, we were actually in what we would call a 3-season model at that time. We'd had 4 seasons, but our 4th season, if those of you remember, I'm sure some of our longtime coaches recall that our 4th season was our fall season, which is actually just bowling. That was only offered with a region competition. There were no other sports offered, and we did not offer a state games. So for us, it's actually a similar format, a similar format of kind of what we're looking at here, just with some variation.
Yes. Before you jump in, there's a question when you're talking about the other states. And do other states in the 3-season model organize recreational sport activities during the summer?
They do, yeah. So it varies by state, but there are states who do offer recreational opportunities, whether it's in the summer or a different season. So there are states who have recreational models that operate during winter. It kind of just depends. And to be honest with you, I know I mentioned the weather, but like a group like Arizona is not going to have a lot of program during the summer. So they tend to do different types of activities that are mostly indoor just because of how hot it is. I know that's not entirely relevant to Washington, but something that we consider. But yes, there are states who have 3-season models who are doing recreational during summer or during other seasons. Okay, so current season structure. You guys are probably all familiar with this, with our winter season, spring season, summer, and then fall. From this, we obviously are jumping from one season to the next. So we have a period where we have a short time to train. We have a short time to have region competitions, and then we have state games typically, and then the new season starts the day after. And so just a few notes with this model, and again, things that were considered is our summer season is actually only 9 weeks total. From when our spring games ends to when our fall season begins is 9 weeks. That's pretty short. Our recommended, actually per the Special Mix International training guidelines, is actually 6 to 8 weeks of training for athletes to just get a grasp on the sport, be able to train. Coaches have to get scores, whether that's 15 games in bowling or a certain amount of swim practices to get times. So it's just measuring that in terms of considering that like summer season is a very short season for us in terms of being able to facilitate what our typical model would be, which is hopefully having local, recreational, regional, and then state. So that's kind of in this existing model. All other seasons here were at least 5 to 7 weeks of training, just pending when you're competing in regionals. And then our next season starts just as the previous season ends. So this is our existing current model. So now I'm going to move into the future structure here. And there's an additional slide that will come after this that will show how the sports are laid out starting in 2025. But our future season structure would begin this fall, which actually starts the end of July. And I know there are quite a few comments I got of starting the end of July is a challenge. Really, the first day of that season for us will be July 29th of this year. So we're going pretty much right at the beginning of August. And for those who remember, our state games was actually at one point was the second weekend of August and then was the third weekend of August. And so there's been slight changes as the years have gone. And so for us, eventually that will become an early August timeframe to running through fall games coming that early part of November. So it's essentially shifting up that season by 2 weeks and adding a week to the overall season. So it's a little bit longer of a training season in terms of adding that week, and then having the 2 weeks in between for the off season is kind of what makes that summer recreation period a little bit shorter. So for us this year, we'd have fall games at the beginning of November, which previously we'd had it actually the second week in November, which is the week of Thanksgiving, basically. And so there was definitely things that we looked at and considered in terms of challenges for families with traveling with Thanksgiving. And I mean, you guys list the ways I'm sure a lot of families have challenges with holidays and things on and off as it goes. So then we'll have a 2-week off season in November, which will be basically that the 2 weeks directly after the games will be considered an off season. In terms of this is kind of the time for coaches to recuperate, to communicate to athletes, for athletes to rest, for people to just have a bit of time to reboot until we start the season. So the start of the season would actually be November 18th, which is around that same week that we would have had state games. Just gives a little bit more of a gap in between. And just because it starts the 18th doesn't mean you need to start that week, because we recognize that's a challenge, that it's Thanksgiving. So if you do want to start after, that's okay. A lot of our teams end up starting about a week later. So then we jump right into winter season, which is that end of November timeframe into the early March timeframe. So the season would start November 18th until the early part of March. Our winter games is not changing. And so that was actually something we had to consider when looking at this model, is we can't shift winter games just because we're committed into Wenatchee through 2027. And really long term, we love Wenatchee. I know everyone loves Wenatchee. We love winter games, one of my favorite games. So that was a huge commitment for us, is to really build from that point to understand how the rest of the season structure would go based off of that. So being in Wenatchee the first part of March, and then back to, again, that 2-week off season, where the 2 weeks directly after the games, again, coaches prep, athlete rest, communication, recruiting volunteers, kind of prepping in between to be able to prepare for jumping into spring season. And then 2025 spring would be end of March into the end of June. And so we've actually pinned down when our games will be for the 2025 spring games will actually be June 20th through 22nd. Originally, it was going to be the very last weekend of July, but we're actually going the 3rd week of June, which is actually only a week later than our existing state games currently for spring. Part of that was really based off of a little bit of facilities. And I know that's been some of the comments and concerns that coaches have had. We deal with the same thing in terms of facility challenges and kind of having to work around when things are available. And so that 3rd week is when the pool is available at King County Aquatic Center, and maintaining that facility was a huge priority just because it's state of the art. We're not going to get better than King County Aquatic Center. So really building off of that venue was super important. So our commitment to that community is there as well in Tacoma and Pierce County. And then we move into this new, and this is for 2025, because this summer will be a little bit longer, we recognize, but future seasons, the summer recreation period will really be 4 to 5 weeks, just depending on the year. And so what our hope is during this time is to be able to offer other activities. So there's going to be no point where there's not anything happening. That makes sense. We're not taking downtime. We're not providing no program. Because I know that was a question that came up a lot was we have this big gap that we're just going to do nothing or we're going to shut down, which is not the case. We will not be shutting down. Our plan is to work with our athlete leaders and other committee members to help build out what they want to see during that recreational time. And I'll dive into a little bit of some of those examples of things that have come up. But basically our new season structure would be a little longer, as I said. Our previous structure was like that 9-week to the 12-week period. And so now we're moving into a 12-week to 14-week total season, which is just adding a week or 2 weeks to each season, just depending on which season it is. Winter season is currently the longest, just because of that gap during the holidays, kind of challenging. So it's a hard thing to try to plan around. So we tried to allocate the most weeks there for teams and our snow sports to be able to try to train and get the timing that they need or the scores that they need to be able to submit. So then overall, this kind of gives us a 6 to 8 week training period, again, pending off of region competition dates, which is great in terms of just being in that Special Olympics International recommended model where we're having 6 to 8 weeks of training and then going into region and state competitions. And then our added off season, as I mentioned, would be 2 weeks between each season, with the exception of summer, which we are considering a recreational period where we will have activity going on. Okay, sorry, I'm talking a lot, so thank you guys for hanging in there. Okay, so this is kind of how our sports look by season in 2025. So they're in order here, starting with winter. So as you can see, winter for us doesn't change at all in terms of the sports that are offered, which is great. Just a big commitment to and not needing to change anything there, at least for now. As I said, remaining adaptable. We'll always review recommendations that you guys have. So if you do have thoughts about where sports are placed or ideas of things that you think might work better, please let us know. But again, winter season is as is. Spring season of 2025 will be the first season where we see those summer sports move into the spring season. So within the spring season, athletes would have an opportunity to do athletics, cycling, bocce, golf, soccer, softball, and swimming, which is quite a bit. It's up there, similar numbers to what we offer in winter. And then our summer recreation season, or summer rec as it's pinned, is that 4 to 5 week season where we are going to be offering different types of programming. But our expectation here really is that this is a recreational season. So this is an opportunity for teams to really explore new sports or try different sports, maybe wanting to do more local competitions. So this is doing jamborees or putting on invitational type competitions in your own communities. And then obviously we're hoping to explore the idea of camps or clinics, sports clinics, whether we include big partners, sports partners that we have in the future state. That's always a hope, but I think for those who've been in Special Olympics, you might know that Special Olympics was actually based off of a camp model. Eunice Kennedy Shriver started it as a sports camp, and that's something that a lot of other states do as well, as they offer Camp Shriver. And then so that's something that we will just be exploring the idea of, looking at camps or clinics to be able to offer. It's a great opportunity for us to focus on health programming, whether we're bringing those screenings that typically only happen at a state level. Our goal has always been to localize with health specifically. It's a big important thing because we know the medical forms are not the easiest. We don't love them either, honestly, but they are required. And so that's just one piece of a medical screening that we would hope to bring locally as the years go, or being able to offer those other screenings that we've seen produce great results, whether that's optometry, podiatry. Our health team does a great job of just finding really good clinicians to show up in communities to provide those screenings. So health would be a really great one. Young athletes is another idea that it came up. I had a couple of athlete leaders actually recommend, I don't know if Trent Marshall's on the call, but he, at one point, he's an athlete from King County, was running a young athlete program himself. And so I think the idea of having our athlete leaders have some activation during this time and running programs themselves, like young athletes, would be really cool. So the limit does not exist around this. These are just some examples of things that we would hope to see during this time. And then moving into the fall season, which for us would be bowling, flag football, gymnastics, pickleball, powerlifting, tennis, and volleyball. So fall is quite expanded in terms of, it used to just be a few sports, but some of those moving into the fall sports timeframe. So that is kind of that as at a glance there. So, and I think, Jay, any questions before I move into the question piece?
We do have a number of questions. I think that if you maybe go through your first slide of questions, and we can run through the rest of them.
Awesome. Okay, so questions that we were asked through the feedback, and again, thank you for those who submitted into the link via Smartsheet. I really appreciate that. We created some themes based off of what people were saying to start address like kind of the major questions we were seeing. So first one, is the new sports model a year-round sports and training program as stated in our mission? Yes. So as I just showed you, there's no breaks or gaps. We're not taking summer off. We just aren't offering region competitions or state competitions during that time. But the goal is to recreate, to have local competitions, to have a lineup of other programs and things that you guys can choose from to facilitate locally. That will be an important part of this because it is the sports and training piece. So it's important to emphasize the training time is going to be crucial there. So yes, this is in line with the mission of Special Olympics and felt that that was an important thing to remember and emphasize here. And then big question I got from athletes, whether that was Facebook or Smartsheet. Can athletes compete in multiple sports in a season? The answer is yes, you can. Here's the hitch. Athletes can compete in an individual sport and a team sport. So you could compete, so the example of spring, you could compete in swimming and softball if you wanted. But if you qualify in both, meaning if you qualify at a region event to go to a state event, you have to choose the team sport. That's if you qualify in both. So if I competed in softball and I competed in swimming and I qualified in both, which I probably wouldn't for myself, but if I did, I would have to choose the team sport because it affects an entire other group of people. So your team has 10 to 12 people on it. There's a roster of folks. You've been training with your team the whole season, and really that team depends on you to show up for that group to be successful at state. And so the choice would have to be the team sport, because as an individual, if you didn't swim, it wouldn't impact your team overall there because it's an individual sport. So the answer is yes. Athletes can compete in multiple sports in a season. It just is competing in an individual sport and a team sport. You wouldn't be able to compete in 2 team sports. So if you wanted to try to do soccer and softball, you would have to choose one or the other. You wouldn't be able to do both, because say that both your teams qualified, which is highly likely or could happen, you wouldn't be able to choose between the 2 of them, and one of your teams would lose out on you participating on their roster, which would shorten their roster. So in the case, it just makes it a little hard for coaches to anticipate who to expect if they're trying to compete against another team sport. So back to the original answer, athletes can do multiple sports in a season. It just has to be one individual sport and one team sport. So again, really encouraging people to get out and do more. We don't want you guys to do less. We want you to do more. I think it's awesome if you want to compete in multiple sports and stay as active as possible. We're highly encouraging that. Okay, so some of these I'll just speak to verbally here. Oh, sorry, Jay, did you want to chime in?
No, go for it. We do have a number of questions in the chat and in the Q&A, but I'll go through those first, then we'll go through the other ones.
Okay, that sounds good. Okay, so can we address concerns about coaches who coach sports that are being combined? So in this case, we're talking about if your bocce, golf, or softball coaches are now, all those sports are moving to the spring. If they also coach sports in the spring, can we talk about the concern or address the concern there? And the concern is that we understand that. We know that's going to be a challenge, is combining the 2. And I think our hope is that obviously recruiting volunteers is not an easy thing. So I think as much resource and support that the staff can provide, whether that's, you have a multitude of folks who are wanting to help here. So I think the more that we can do to understand what your guys' challenges are, because I'm sure there are a range, just like we've talked about, whether you're living in a rural community or an urban community, the challenges are slightly different in terms of getting people to participate. And volunteerism has been a really big challenge in general in Special Olympics, and not even just for us, but for nonprofits, just because people are volunteering differently post-pandemic. And so finding ways for us to be something that people want to show up for. It's not hard to show up once you're here. I know all of our coaches know that once you are here and you're volunteering, it's one of the best things that you'll get to do or experience. So we will work with you guys to understand the challenges and help support and fill as many gaps as we can around volunteers and coaches. Can we address the concern about facilities? Yeah, facilities is a challenge, and we totally recognize that. In the conversation with our coaches committee, facilities are going to be a challenge really regardless of where you're putting things. If you're moving one thing and changing another, likely that one of those sports is going to have a challenge with facilities, whether that's competing against high school competitions or with community groups. That's just something that we've seen become more of a challenge as the years have gone, just with the increase of youth sports and participation in general. And there's only a certain number of facilities that are available. So again, that's one that we recognize and want to help support where we can. Our program managers, so Cheyenne, Tim, Chad, hopefully you guys are familiar with those folks around the state, just leaning in to help support, find facilities, or even just understanding how do we develop better relationships with facilities at a state level for like statewide, so that we're able to help support you guys with getting facilities or helping you in the moments when you really have challenges where you're like, hey, I'm stuck, I can't find anything, reaching out to staff so we can help facilitate and find as much facilities as we can for our teams. But we know that's going to be a real challenge. Why is fall starting the end of July, early August? So that was a question that kind of came up a few times, but I think just based off of what I shared in the visuals, there's kind of something that adjustments that needed to be made on both ends. And it's really hard because we only have a certain amount of weeks in a year. And so This was really based off of kind of the planting of winter games and then kind of how the rest of our big games fit in, and then trying to address the needs of kind of everything in terms of like when things begin and end. There are a couple of other states who have a fall season that goes from June to October. So it's like an early June to an early October. So again, it's kind of just an example of like, we recognize that it's not perfect, and we know there'll be challenges, and again, adapting where we can. So this is where we're going to start to see how things can be addressed, or how we can better support maybe a different time frame here. How will we facilitate more competition at a local level? That's a great question. And so part of this plan that when we talk about season changing is that Special Mix Washington, as well as a lot of other states, are working through something called sports advancement. And sports advancement is kind of exactly what it sounds like. How do you advance through sports? And so one of the things that we will be looking at is, how do our sports start? How do they grow? How do they end up as a region and a state event? And so part of us figuring out how we will help facilitate more local competition is really defining what that actually means to locally do that, and then setting up the resources for people to actually facilitate that or understand what that means. Because local can kind of be a range of things, whether it's just an inner squad scrimmage to jamborees, invitationals, or just even hosting more local tournaments in your guys' communities. And so part of our planning over the next few years will just be looking at our sports advancement planning, which we're working on now, and that we'll hope to share soon, which just really shows like an example. If we want to start doing archery, for example, one of the ways that you would probably do that is maybe saying like, oh, during our sports recreation season, we want to try to do archery, and just see if our athletes like it, if this is something that we want to do. But as we see like people registering and expressing interest in starting archery, maybe around the state of Washington, we would look at what it actually means to facilitate a competition for that. How many people do you need to create quality competition, to create quality divisions? And so it's growing it from a grassroots up to the state level. So at each level, we would say, when archery becomes, how does it become a region event? How many people does it take? And then at a state level, how many people would we need to actually facilitate competition coming from each region to actually make sure that that's a quality competition? So part of that consideration is just looking at right now we have some sports that automatically qualify to state. And so part of the sports advancement plan would just be looking at how to grow those sports more locally to be able to facilitate better competition at a state level. So it would be resetting some of those in some format. So again, more resources to come here on what this means. Some people are already doing this. For those who are in the Northwest who are part of the Bocce Extravaganza or Hot Bocce on the east side of the state, we have program coordinators who are facilitating local competition with other teams who are near to them. So a couple good examples there that we'll start to get into. Excuse me, just gotta take a little breath. Will there be softball this year? The answer is yes. This is still, for us, we still have the summer recreation season that's happening this year. We just won't be offering region and state, unfortunately, because the season is too short. There's only 8 weeks between when spring games ends to when the new fall season begins. So we really had to just make a decision on when we would start. And so the decision to start this fall was the best choice. So you can still participate in softball. Our hope is that we'll see some local competition happening, or some recreation that's happening locally between the teams who are wanting to do this. Obviously we will work with you guys and share more out about what this means to recreate. How do you recreate? How would we put on a local competition, as I said? So you would be able to do softball this year. We just won't have region and state for this year. Will there be softball? Yes, next year. Yes, it will become a spring season sport. And so you would be able to participate in spring season next year for softball. We'll be offering a region competition, most likely. I think a part of this, like I mentioned, is the sports advancement is really seeing what our numbers are looking like. But our goal is to offer competition for those sports who have enough numbers to do so. So softball will be here for this year. Might look a little bit different, but yes, softball will be in spring season for next year. What will paperwork deadlines look like? It's a really good question. So you guys might have heard a few murmurs. I know that David has mentioned, our CEO has mentioned our Center of Excellence or the formation of a new registration system. And so part of our hope is just when are we going to roll this out? How are we going to roll this out, and what pieces of this will be rolled out? The goal of this system, as has been shared, is it's meant to make things easier for people to just join Special Olympics. We know and recognize that registering and participating in Special Olympics has not been easy. And we want to make this easier because that should be the easy part of Special Olympics, is just showing up and being able to play and do what you want to do. So we are still figuring out kind of what the deadlines will look like, because a little bit of that is contingent on if the system will be available for us to utilize. So we will start to develop those here soon, but we'll definitely have those out for everyone by the end of spring season, or if not sooner, just with more information on what that's going to look like. But our goal is to start to make some really big positive change around the registration side, and hopefully one that feels good to our coaches and families who we know have not had an easy time registering for Special Olympics. Okay, and then the last one, and then I'll take a deep breath, Jay, and you can maybe give me some questions that I didn't answer. Weather. Why did we move golf during the nice weather for the West Side? I heard this about I saw this for softball golf. It is beautiful weather on the west side of the state. The challenge that was considered when we looked at this season in particular is that's not always the case on the east side. East side has much hotter weather. And so I was working with the coaches to understand some of the challenges that they experience, and it is way, way hot on the east side of the state over the Cascades during the summertime. And so we know that's not ideal. It's kind of one of those situations that doesn't work well for everyone. It's either that it's really hot for the east side or it's perfect weather for the west side. So making a decision is just something that we considered in terms of how to maybe be able to go a little bit later into June and then start fall into that later July, early August timeframe. We recognize it's still going to be hot, so there's no easy choices around weather statewide because it's not all the same. But I think, again, obviously we'll have that summer recreation period. So really encouraging people to still golf during this time if you want. Just because golf is in spring doesn't mean you can't recreate with it in the summer. You can still go out to the course and play and take advantage of the weather or try new sports during this time. And that's our hope, is that people won't stop doing things. And obviously, again, we'll be working on providing other types of programs that people can participate in during that summer season time. So, okay, Jay. Question.
Right. Question 1, will this new change result in significant cuts in staff at SOA?
No. We are not cutting staff. If anything, I think our hope is to continue to fundraise and be able to add more staff. I think that will be really important. I think that our staff does a really amazing job, but I would say that adding staff is really the goal here, not to reduce it.
If we are independent, what medical insurance coverage would be offered if we offer a program in the summer?
Can you repeat that?
If we are independent, what medical insurance coverage would be offered if we offer a program in the summer? I don't know.
Yeah.
Whatever insurance we offer.
Say it again.
Whatever the insurances that we offer for our teams. I'm presuming.
Yeah, so our insurance wouldn't change for the people who are wanting to participate in the summer recreation season. What you will need to do is kind of this idea around how will you guys recreate. Part of that is that you will still need to do some form of registration. And we're still figuring out what that is, but my goal is to make that as simple as possible. Other states call it a registered training program, and that's what I'm hoping we can do here. which is basically similar to some form of the preseason form. However, if you're thinking about it in the old version or the version we have now, which is just basically sharing like your team, what will you guys be doing during the summer, where will you be practicing, and then sharing the names of the people who will participate. Our insurance is really contingent on you guys letting us know who is participating. And then part of that registration you guys will submit is that a confirmation from coaches that you have forms from everyone who is participating. Because obviously that's a big piece of our registration overall is our athletes having and U5 partners having their forms filled out and completed. And so that will be the responsibility of the coaches to just make sure that you guys have those forms locally. That's something that you guys should have now anyway. That doesn't change. You should have forms when you start practice, just because if something happens and someone gets injured, being able to have their form for them to receive coverage is key. So long answer, that was a long answer. Short answer is you guys will have coverage as long as you register and submit the information that we ask for.
Great. When will the regional competition be for bowling?
For bowling, for this year?
Not specific, but maybe if you're able to address this year and next year.
Yeah, so we have currently, I think last year we hosted 11 region competitions for bowling. So there's quite a few. So I wouldn't be able to give a specific date. So we will release dates as we get closer to the season. But I would say typically as the season starts, we send out dates and packets that or the coaches packet that can, sorry, the season packet that contains all of the dates. So as we get closer to that season, we will let you guys know the dates for bowling. And obviously, if we, the sooner we get them done and can post them, we'll definitely share externally and get those on our website so that you guys know what to expect.
How are the representatives chosen for the panel? And I'm presuming that is the council of folks that helped with the determining this.
Yeah, it's a great recommendation, or a great recommendation. Recommendation is kind of how it occurred. But when we were looking to form committees, we were looking for recommendations from staff and from volunteers who we work with like on a games management team level. But mostly these were recommended by staff of coaches who are kind of representing a different types of teams. So whether you were a singular team operating in one season, or you had a program that's operating in every season and are massive and have multiple sports. The goal was for us to try to identify a representation of each of those different types of teams that are made up, also from different parts of the state. And so we did ask staff to recommend people from different parts of the state to join those committees, both on the athlete and the coaches side.
Sorry, I'm just looking through here. Will all the spring sports for example, have a regional competition and state competition?
It's a good question. So it goes back to our sports advancement plan. And so part of that, like I mentioned, is that what we're going to be looking at, just because of the number of sports in each season, is really what qualifies each sport to have a state competition. So I can't guarantee that everyone will have a region or a state competition. It really just depends on the registration numbers. And so what we will be posting and sharing out with everyone is what are those minimum numbers? What does it take to host a regional competition? What does it take to host a state competition? Because one of the things we're going to try to move away from that I've heard from athletes as well is just the fairness around those sports that automatically qualify to state and removing those from that and really rebuilding them from a grassroots. So it's understanding by sport, what number does it take to have a minimum viable competition at each of those levels. So I can't guarantee now what it will look like. It will really depend on how people register and where the interest lies for those different sports that will be offered.
How is SOA addressing that coaches are aging out?
It's a really good question. And it's a challenging one that I don't think we've fully solved for. I know that we've had lots of conversations with staff of just the challenges around coaches aging out and how do we recruit new coaches. And so part of what we want to try to do is actually develop contingency plans for each of our programs. And so our program managers have that as a part of their goal to just work with each team to understand where the challenges are with coaches, whether that's needing more coaches or being in a place where like, hey, I'm feeling like I want to retire, but I have no one to take over. And so helping identify who those programs are, and then how do we help facilitate finding a replacement, and what does that look like? And it's not something I can answer fully right off the bat. Just know that it's something that we recognize as a concern. Excuse me. I know we have a lot of coaches who have so much experience, who've been around forever. And excuse me, your guys' wealth of knowledge and historical knowledge is critical, but I also recognize that there's a point where you might want to retire and travel and do all these things. And so as much as it pains me to think about losing some of you guys or having you retire, it is something that we need to address and help support you guys with, so that you're not feeling like you're stuck. Not that you feel that way, but I think giving more options and trying to come up with better pipelines and plans, whether that's within your own team, finding unified partners who we can, that you can identify to help maybe coach into being those coaches or taking over as programs. But I think it's bigger than that. I think it's just having a touch point with each of our programs, to understand what your guys' challenges are. And if that is one of them, understanding that and then figuring out and coming up with strategies to actually help you recruit and start to actively deal with that, so that you're not feeling that pressure on your own. So what can we do to help provide resources? I think it's knowing kind of what the needs are around coaching in general.
Great. And we only have 8 more minutes left, and there are a number of comments and questions that we still have to get through. So I'm wondering if we should, well, we can continue on, but should we do a Q&A document as a follow-up, since I know that we're going to get to all the questions?
Yes, that's a great recommendation. Okay. So we'll take Jay's recommendation there. We'll get as many questions through as we can in the next 8 minutes. And anything we don't answer, we will put into an FAQs document and post on that site where you registered for the webinar. I'll also send it out in an email to the group that's here tonight. So feel free to share that with others or direct them to the website, but I have everyone's emails because you guys all registered. So I'll be sure to follow up and send those specific answers to you guys.
That's great. Okay, so let's power through. If you are lengthening the fall season, can some thought be given to a competition between area-wide and state games?
Say that again?
If you are lengthening the fall season, can some thought be given to a competition between area-wide and state games? Between regionals and state, I guess.
I don't know if I understand the question.
I think maybe we can follow up directly with the person that left that. Sorry if I butchered that question.
Yeah, I'm sorry if I'm misunderstanding that. I think because I've been talking so much, but I'll follow up with that person on that specific question. You can make a note.
I'm just going through here. We have a lot of comments, but I'm looking for questions. Can a coach multiple sports in one season? And if so, how will that work?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. Ideally, no. But again, we recognize that it's a challenge, and we recognize it's something that's happening now. I think it's ideal to obviously have a dedicated coach, but we know that's not the reality. So I think if the ideal scenario is that you guys only are coaching one sport per season, the reason being is that you can really focus on that sport and the training and the time that it takes to like get practice plans prepped and do all the things you need to do as a coach for that specific sport. I know that either you guys do it or you might have, friends who also maybe coach youth sports who are doing multiple sports, and it can be a challenge. It's a huge scheduling issue. I've coached for many years and it's a huge commitment. And so I'm so grateful for our coaches, especially because you guys are volunteers. I think that that would not be without challenge if you're trying to do multiple coaching roles in a season. So I would really recommend and emphasize coaching one team if possible. And if it's something that's a challenge for you guys that you want to try to problem solve with us, please let us know if that's the case. I'd love to just understand which teams that impact and how we can try to come up with some resources or really focus on volunteer recruitment in your specific area for a specific sport that you might be trying to start or have someone take over. So please let us know so that we can help identify and work with you guys on that.
How will this affect qualifying for nationals and worlds? If it will.
It's a great question. It won't affect any opportunity. So basically, if you look at our Special Mix general rules, which state that basically how we select people for qualifying or competing at a USA Games or a World Games is typically done on a random draw, and it's done based off of the highest level of competition that's offered in the state. So the example would be, soccer. We have a state competition that happens, and so any of the teams that won a gold medal at a state competition would be put into a random draw process. It kind of just depends a little bit on what North America or Special Mix North America, who runs Team USA, looks at. So just like you guys have different levels of teams for soccer is the example, how we have different divisions, they would do a similar thing where they don't just allow you to take everyone in terms of like, they might say that Washington gets a certain level of division based off of what we're randomly selected for. So the example is we might get randomly pulled or given an allocation that's for like a mid-level division team or a lower level division team. So based off of the divisions that we have and how the teams qualify at our state competition is how we would select based off of that. So another example would be that, say, we could only offer region level competitions for certain sports. And it's something that we want to try to get an allocation for, we would still be able to facilitate the opportunity for athletes to go to USA or World Games in those specific sports. So that was a very long answer. The short answer is this doesn't impact your ability to be able to qualify for USA and World Games as long as you guys are competing and qualifying at a major tournament.
Right. For programs that use SOA provided insurance, how are they covered in recreational events and scrimmages that are not supported by SOA?
It's a simple answer. So if you do not register and let us know that you are recreating, you would not be covered. So part of that, like summer recreation season, as I mentioned, is what I was calling a registered training program. So whether you're going to do golf or you're going to try cornhole or you're going to do archery, just throwing out examples of things you guys could try that we're going to get set up, is you'd have to register to let us know that's what you're doing and who's on the list of people who are participating. So if you guys are going off and doing things without any knowledge, like Special Mix having any knowledge, you would not be covered by our insurance. So super important around the registering piece and the having your athlete forms or unified partner forms for our coaches, making sure you have all of those. That's really important of how our coverage applies. There's the registering and having the forms accessible.
Time for one more?
Yes.
You think? Okay. For fall season sports that are high school teams, how will it work if they don't have access to the students until after Labor Day? How will fall sports work in the high school if we don't have access to our athletes until September? And that might be a follow-up question, I think, for the UCS team.
Yeah, and it's a really good question. I think part of our challenge is getting the information soon enough so that schools can communicate before they leave for summer. And in some cases, we know that's not a perfect system because I know, as the question mentioned, that some teachers don't have access to students till after Labor Day. So it's something we really have to evaluate. At this point, it impacts a very small group of people of schools programs who are doing bowling specifically. And so it's something we have to address. And so I'm working with our Unified Champion Schools team to really look at what that means, because I know that the timelines are not super ideal for the schools specifically. But I think how we will approach it for this year is just trying to get out as much information ahead of when you guys are leaving for summer season, so that those athletes that are interested in participating when they come back to school are able to join a program, and whether that's potentially looking at it as a recreation type season for bowling until we can kind of figure out what the best system will be around the school's program. We're still working through some of those details. I know the vision for schools long term is to just continue to integrate with the WIA system that's established. Is just being able to promote our schools teams participating alongside their peers in the format of like their own championships or districts. And so it's still something that we are figuring out. That's definitely a challenge. But trying to get as much information out as soon as possible so people understand how that will work. So more information to come on that end.
We're at 6:30.
Okay.
Wrap up.
Yes. Okay. So thank you guys so much for all the feedback. Again, please continue to share that feedback. I don't know, Jay, if you have access to the link or be able to share it in, but for those of you guys found your way to the website to register for the webinar, please utilize that same link to, if you have any additional questions or comments based off of tonight, things that you found helpful, things that you want more information on, please let me know via that link. As Jay said, I know there were a number of questions that probably didn't get answered in this short amount of time. So I'm making a commitment to getting those answered and then out to you guys within the next week, if not sooner. I don't want to wait too long because I know people are anxious to get answers to their questions. We'll also post all those FAQs on the website as well. So there is a second webinar coming up in April. Again, with the feedback, also remind you guys and send that link for the secondary webinar if you do want to come and ask more questions or just get more information. You'll see a lot of the same information you saw tonight. Originally, we had separated the webinars between 2024 and 2025, and I realized that didn't make sense. So I just did them all together, which is what you saw tonight. So please let me know if there's anything I missed that you would find helpful to see in the next one. But thank you guys so much. I really appreciate everyone's time. I know that it's super valuable. Know that you have a committed group of staff who loves Special Olympics and loves our mission, who is really just trying to consider all the ways that we can continue to improve and make Special Olympics the best version of itself. So thank you guys all very much, and hopefully I'll see you soon.